Good morning, everybody, and welcome on this cold, wet, chilly Melbourne morning to 18 Minutes with 180 Markets, wherever you are in the world right now. We have listeners and viewers from all over the place. With us today, I think, is a really interesting guest, Andrew Tunks of Meteoric. And what I think is so interesting is that we are truly living in unprecedented times. But Andrew, as you will hear, is a man of all seasons. And not only has he lived all over the world, but he really has had a number of seismic shifts, so to speak, in terms of what he's done. And I think that, everything from being an explorer to operating in the armed services, and what it teaches you is resilience and how to change. And that's something we'll get into on the call. But with that introduction, Andrew, welcome to 18 Minutes with 180 Markets.
Greg, it's great to be it's great to sort of be here with you.
Exactly. We're all doing it together. That's for sure. Andrew, I always like to start out with people's backgrounds, and especially in your case, maybe just tell us a little bit in your words, how did you get from grade school to where you are today?
Sure. So I'm Melbourne born and bred. And I suppose as a young boy, like many Melbourne young boys, I really had aspirations to be a footballer. Unfortunately, I wasn't very good. And so straight out of school, I ended up in the military. I joined the army and I went to RMC Duntroon, which is the Australian equivalent of what you might know as West Point, the American Officers College. Unfortunately, I had a very bad motorcycle accident at RMC, and I never finished my degree there. But I've always maintained a very strong interest in the military. And in fact, my two eldest boys are both lieutenants in the army now. So from there, I went back to Monash, back to a Melbourne university and did my undergraduate. I was very much a science student. And didn't have a strong interest in geology at the time. But in Australia back then, you had to do 4 subjects, and I did maths, physics, chemistry, and geology became the 4th one, and then it became the passion of my life. So I just learned to apply the physics, chemistry, and maths in geology, and that was what was interesting to me. From there, I took my first job in Kambalda. With Western Mining, straight out of university, and that would have been in '87. I think that was another seminal moment in my career.
Yeah.
That year, they employed 20 new graduates at Kambalda, and some of those guys have gone on to stellar careers. Rowan Williams, who's done exceptionally well, Rob Behetz, Peter Langworthy, Steve Cowell, Ian Glacken, guys that have really become leaders in the Australian junior industry. And I was fortunate to be part of that cohort, and I think it was a great school for geology.
Yeah. Can I just ask you for just diving into that for 1 second, maybe to get off? So, what is it? We've interviewed so many people with some type of WMC background. Is it the go-get-it nature of it? Why has it become such a finishing school, if you will, for world-class geos?
It's a great question. No. It's a great question. I would not hesitate to say it's down to Roy Woodall and his emphasis. So Roy Woodall was the discoverer of the Kambalda nickel deposits, and then that grew out of that into the gold deposits there. But he was a great believer in geology first, and old school geology, boots on ground, logging, doing quality geology work. And I feel that there was an enormous emphasis. And to be honest, some of that was lost on me as a young geo. I didn't always understand why it was so important. And that's something that perhaps came back to me later during my PhD. But there was a great organisational emphasis on doing quality science and quality geology.
Right. Okay, interesting. And, that's obviously led you all over the world. And you've, also had, I would say, a specialty in gold, if you will. And gold tends to be right now, certainly, the metal of choice, if you know what I mean. Maybe just for the not geology trained person,
Sure.
explain a little bit about gold and exploration, and then maybe we can take it from there into your current project.
I think the thing that people don't always understand about gold, but it's crucial to the way that you explore, is to understand that the gold is not in the rock when the rock is formed. The gold comes this is not always the case, but 99% of gold deposits form millions of years after the rocks that they're in. And so, the gold is brought into the rocks in hot water. And so how do you pump water through rock? Well, you don't. You have to break the rock. And that process of breaking the rock is an earthquake, effectively. Though the seismic events allow water to access the rock, and then that allows chemical reactions to occur. And so if you don't understand that, then it's very difficult, in my opinion, to look for gold deposits. I would argue that the vast majority of gold deposits are structurally controlled, and that is by the earthquake architecture that was then, not now, but billions of years ago. Most of the gold deposits are billions of years old, or hundreds of millions of years old. Yes, they're still forming right now in New Zealand and Japan and Chile, etc., in active plate margins, but most of the ones that we're mining are very, very old. So we're trying to look back at the architecture of the geology as it was, let's say, in the case of Palm Springs or Jarena, about the same age, 1.8 billion years ago. And I see us as the historians of the planet and looking back on the history of the planet.
Right, fantastic. And, and I guess with that introduction, maybe, and, you mentioned Chile, but another place in South America, Brazil, maybe we'll dovetail into there to your project in Brazil, and then then bring it back home here to Palm Springs in Australia. But maybe starting out with Brazil, just tell us a little bit about what brought you there and about the project there, and also maybe then the challenges of dealing with COVID in that situation.
Yeah. So I got involved in Brazil about 5 or 6 years ago with a small gold mine at Orinoco Gold, and operationally that didn't work out in the end. But what I realised was that Brazil was significantly underexplored compared to Australia or West Africa. A lot of the basic geology, a lot of the basic shallow drill testing that we do, say in and around Kalgoorlie, just hadn't been done, and there was a lot of artisanal workings. There was a lot of evidence that there was gold in these systems. They were the right age and the right type of rocks, but a lot of the basic prospecting that we've probably been doing in Australia since the 1980s hasn't been done in Brazil. Right. And so I felt that was a really great opportunity. When I took over the role at Meteoric, which was a couple of years ago now, we were focused on cobalt in Canada. And I didn't love those assets. And I said to my board, let's go back to gold. It's what I know, and that's what we should be doing. And so we looked at projects all over the world, but I was certainly drawn to Brazil. I had some good contacts there, and I felt that it was significantly underexplored. And I would say where we ended up at Alta Floresta is the Alta Floresta belt, which is a Proterozoic, so about a 1.8 billion year old belt. It's had very little modern exploration work done on it. And I think there are some wonderful opportunities, as has been evidenced by things like, the discovery of porphyry coppers in the belt, some significant gold deposits. But exploration is at its early days. And so I certainly saw those opportunities and was very excited to go back there.
Right. And then also, just, I guess, going at it a little bit deeper as far as not only was it underexplored, but the structure there with a lot of open pit mining. Do you have any view on open versus underground? Easier, harder, other than the obvious of the cost?
The project that we ended up with is at the moment a narrow, high-grade vein. So you would a vein system, not a single vein, but you would clearly start in an open pit environment, but would very quickly go underground because they're narrow. And the stripping ratios, mean that you have to go underground, but they're very high grade. I'm a bit agnostic about the mining method. I mean, obviously, if you have a large, low grade tonnage deposit, then open cut is always the way to go. But I think, clearly Brazil have both a large amount of open cut and underground mines. People underestimate what an advanced technology country, is available in Brazil. Like, it's a major industrial country. You can build your whole plant there.
Right.
In Brazil, they've had geology universities longer than Australia's been a country. So there's plenty of great educated people. There's plenty of know-how. So I'm not too caught up in the detail of how we might mine it. We're still very much at the exploration phase over there.
Yeah. And, what's interesting is that obviously COVID has impacted your ability to explore further over there. But then, maybe I was also thinking, one thing about your background is resilience and change. And one thing that certainly, your armed forces training, it teaches you is that it's not always perfect and you have to adapt. And one thing I think that you've done to adapt to COVID is to then start to look for some Australian assets in Palm Springs, and maybe just tell us a little bit about how that started, and then where are we in Palm Springs at this moment?
Yeah, so I was in Brazil to kick off the Juruena exploration in February, and
Right.
It was right at the start of the COVID epidemic. Really, I was starting to see. I'd been in Africa. I went to Brazil, and I was starting to see people wearing masks in the airport. And it was the early stages of the virus, and I just had a sense that Brazil, it's not all parts of it are very first world, but parts of it are not. And I certainly could see, with dense populations and not a great medical system, I could see problems. And bringing this up with some of my major shareholders, and gold was going gangbusters,
Yeah.
and so we decided that we could see a storm coming, and so we elected to look for an Australian project. And since then we've had some lockdowns in Australia, which have impacted my ability to do that. But we, as part of finding the Brazilian project, we reviewed projects all around the world. So I dragged out the ones that we looked at in Australia, and I came back to this one that we looked at in Halls Creek. I was familiar with the project. I had my PhD area was not too far from that, in Australian terms anyway. It was the next mine across, but it was 600 kilometres away.
Right.
So I was familiar with the operation. I'm familiar with the rocks. At the same time, another student from UTAS was doing a PhD on the rocks in this area. So we had obviously talked, same age, Paleoproterozoic. And so what I liked about this project was that there'd been no work done here for 20 years. And it was a mine back in the late 90s, from 95 to 97. It was a small gold mine. It produced about 50,000 ounces at 2 grams, but I really felt they were just scratching the surface. At that time, amazingly, they had an all-in sustaining cost of $540. Now, gee whiz, who wouldn't kill for that? Yeah. But the gold price was $500, and they went under. And they went under without, and then the asset went into private hands, and has effectively had nothing done since then. Now, that's incredibly exciting for me. No geophysics, no drilling, no geochemistry, no structural interps, nothing done. And it's just sat there. One of the reasons that's happened is because the digital data from that time has been lost. And so what that means is, I like this project, but we couldn't pull it into a 3D model and spin it around. You know how you do it, and you look at it on your computer. And it took us back to the way I learned my stuff at Western Mining, which was a paper section on an A0, a giant piece of paper with all the writing on it, and looking through each hole individually and pulling the grades off and going back to first principles. And as we did that, we realized that there was an enormous opportunity here. The mine stopped when it was about a third of the way down to its planned depth. There's ore in the bottom of the pit, particularly at the southern end, everywhere. The northern end was taken out, but the southern end was completely open, and it continues south. And I just think there's an enormous opportunity to go in here and drill as soon as we get permission, which we expect to be in August, to go and drill some great holes straight away and show that this is a real project. There's some great intercepts here, 70 metres at 2.5 grams, 20 metres at nearly 9 grams, 50 metres at 3. These are all old
Right.
stuff that is no longer JORC compliant. The core's gone. The core was thrown in the pit. There's no pulps that we can't reassay them. Everything's gone. So we're starting from scratch, but we are starting from scratch knowing roughly where to go. And I think that's a real opportunity for us.
Right. Okay. So you're going to start hopefully drilling next month. And when do you think that when do you think we should get some results into the marketplace?
Well, so we'll certainly start with an RC rig, and that, as opposed to diamond. So in Brazil, we're really drilling only diamond drilling, which is a slow process, maybe 30 meters a day. RC drilling in Northern Australia, in pretty dry bedrock, you're getting well over 200 meters a day. So our program, we're still working out the details of that, but our turnaround times for assays will be quite quick up there. I'm not 100% sure because of the COVID situation, but sure. I would think that if we start drilling in August, we'll be delivering results in September for sure.
Right. So it's a Q4 could be a very, in a good way, noisy quarter for calendar quarter for the company.
Absolutely. I think Q3 and then running into Q4, we'll have, because we're anticipating results from our first results from our current drilling program. So we are drilling in Brazil at the moment.
Right.
So it took us a while to get back there, and we had to institute a lot of plans and safety protocols and cut down our staff and everything, because we are in the southern part of the Amazon, and I didn't want to be the guy who took COVID into the Amazon. So we've been super careful. And during August, September, I would be expecting that we've got, results from Brazil, results from Palm Springs, some visuals. I mean, my understanding of the Palm Springs ore, even though I've never seen any of it, but old photos, it's quite sulfidic. So we will also have a diamond rig on site, and we'll get some cores that we can look at and understand the geology. So I think we are really set up for some amazing news flow. Yeah.
That sounds great. And obviously, look, drilling is exciting, everything, but it does cost money. Can you just give us a state of the balance sheet and just how do we feel about funding, the program?
Sure. Well, we currently have around we committed to a small raise just on this acquisition. It was only 1.3 million. And effectively that went to pay for the acquisition and the DD costs and everything else. So that will leave us, I think, with about 7 million in the bank. And so that's more than enough to fund our complete exploration program through this year and into early next year. So yeah. We really haven't started looking at our capital needs beyond that at the moment. But of course, if this goes gangbusters, I can see a situation where we might have 3-4 rigs up there and committing to drilling out a resource quite quickly. So, of course, if that happens, you are spending money quite fast, but for the right reasons. Absolutely. I think the market's always prepared to support that. We've got some great shareholders, and one of the things I'd say about Meteoric, and it's a great blessing, is that our stock trades. I mean, we trade great volumes, so you can get in and out of the stock if you're looking at it. There's always an opportunity to get in, get out. We've had quite a lot of volatility, and so I think it's a great stock to have a punt on. And I would say to your investors who maybe aren't super familiar with the space, the only time that you should be investing in a gold company is when they're about to or are drilling. That's the only time we can make a discovery, right? Everything else is fluff. And we have to do it, and we have to do geophysics, but the only time that we can make a discovery is with the truth meter. We have to drill, because that's the only way. And so I'm a guy who places a great emphasis on that internally within the company. We're always focused on the current or the next drill campaign, because we want to be known as ore finders. We want to be known as discoverers. I've been involved in discoveries in Ghana, in Botswana, in Tanzania, and it's the most exciting time of your life professionally. Yeah. The buzz in a company when you feel that you're onto something. As a very young geo, I did some of the early drilling at one of the mines in Kambalda called Junction, which is, plus 4 million ounce ore deposit. man, the excitement in the exploration room, every hole, you know, when are you at target? What does it look like? You know, and so that's where we want to live as a company. And so that's what investors should be looking at. Is the company that you're investing in going to drill? When and what does that mean? And what are those opportunities?
Yeah, Andrew, I wish I could spend more time with you, Ethan, but we do try to keep these things a little bit punchy.
Sure.
But with that, thank you so much. As you said, just to recap, really is an exciting time, and using your words, the best time to be in a gold company is when they're drilling, and if not now, when, right? Especially with gold hovering 1,700 an ounce and seems to be levitating. So, Andrew, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and have a great day.
Greg, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, and great to meet you. Thank you very much.